Welcome back to Mind Talk, where we like to bridge the disconnect between what brain science knows and what people do. In life, as in business or any aspect or any other perspective of our lives, we have our good moments and we have our bad moments. We find events that shape us. They allow us to evolve and grow. Now, these might be very events that we define as very joyous, that we find fulfillment in, we find meaning. But there can be other events in our lives where it may seem empty, it may seem vacuous. We may be filled with despair, or sometimes we don't understand the meaning or the purpose of what we're doing anymore. But it's these events, when strung over a period of time, which become our life narrative. Countless and numerous other sort of neutral events in life create this narrative. It becomes our life story. It is how we explain from where we came from to where we are now to where we're going to ourselves. It helps us make sense of our place in the world. It gives us context. It allows us to relate to different things. A part of my job is sitting down with clients, is trying to help them to overcome obstacles that may have occurred some point in their past or something that may be occurring from now. These obstacles prevent them from moving on. Now, for those obstacles that have happened, some sort of event that has happened that they've defined as negative in their lives, a majority of the thing is they haven't made any sort of meaning of it. It hasn't made any sense to them in that sort of life narrative, in their overall story. And part of it is going back to understand, how does it fit? How can you put meaning to this? Like anyone else, even though I work with this on a weekly basis, I have my own events. I have my own experiences and situations throughout my life that have defined who I am. They've allowed me to evolve as a person, to understand also my place and context within the world and into my community. One of the toughest events in my life was back in 2007. My dad from Canada gave me a call and said, "Your mom has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer." And the ovarian cancer was at a late stage, pretty much untreatable. I mean, that was like a hammer to my chest. It just knocked the wind out of me. One moment I'm on the phone call with my dad. The next moment I'm sitting on a plane headed home. Now, generally when I head home, it's because of, to see my family, to see my friends, to see my brother. It's always been sort of a joyous occasion. But this was different. Sitting on that plane, I was lost in thoughts and emotions. Once when I landed in Canada, I spent time with my mom at her bedside, for several months, and trying to also comfort my dad at the point. And to keep a sort of this long story quite short, I spent, as I said, a few months with my mom, and one day I got up. They had moved her from the hospital to home, where she could spend her remaining days at home under sort of care. And it had been several weeks, and I woke up one morning. My mom was sitting up in bed. She was very cognizant, seemed to be very clear. And she said, "Jason, have a seat beside me. He just wants to know that, you've done all you can. I kind of release you in the sense of being committed here. There's not much more you can do. Your dad is here, your brother's here. I have good care. You need to get home. You need to go home. You have a family of your own. You got a life that you need things." We had our conversations. We shared words. But, soon after that, I was sitting in a taxi headed out to the airport. And I was lost in my own emotions, the swirl of emotions and thoughts. And it all hinged on the fact that, that was the last conversation I was going to have with my mom. And that was one of the things that I thought, would I ever get over that? It hit me because it was the last conversation I would ever see. It was the last time I would sit beside her, have a conversation with her. And that is when, my relationship with my mentor, my professor in graduate school, it came kind of back to me, sitting in that taxi ride to that airport. And I had to think about, the 3 rings he told me about. And those 3 rings was this. The first ring, the inner ring, if you can imagine 3 concentric rings, the inner ring is what you can control. The center ring is what you can influence. And the third ring is what you don't control. I could control my own emotions. I can control the meaning and the purpose I gave to that situation. How could I influence it? Well, those are all the cognizant questions that I was struggling with, and I was trying to find answer within that trip. But I also came to the conclusion that there are certain things that are outside my control, certain things that I just have to let go, make peace with, and focus on. Because my professor told me, he says, Jason, the brain can only focus on one thing at a time. You're either focusing on what you can't control or what you can control. If you're focusing on what you can control, then those two inner rings, the inner ring of influence and the inner ring of control, those shrink. And when your attention is focused on what you can control, then things seem unsurmountable, things seem hopeless, things can seem impossible. You can lose a sense of control, you can lose your confidence in yourself and the ability to deal with the situation. Now, my mom's passing was a very difficult thing for me to tackle and to deal with. But in my own way, those questions that my professor gave me, what do you control, what do you influence, and what don't you control, allowed me to be cognizant of the thought process that I need to do in order to make sense of this event, to give it meaning, to give it purpose in my life narrative that I spoke about earlier. He said, since the brain can only focus on one thing, if you focus on what you can control and what you influence, you give power back to yourself. The situation doesn't control you. You, in some sense, can control the meaning and the purpose you give to that situation. You can influence your interpretation of that things. As we move into the new year, that is coming quite fast, I want you to think about this. In your own situations, you're going to have events in your life that you feel are hard to handle. But if you can get a grip on it, if you can ask yourself, what do I control of the situation? What can I influence? By focusing on the inner circle and the middle circle, that increases. And your focus won't be on what you can't control. That will fade to the back. By focusing on what you can control and what you can influence, it'll allow you to move forward. It will give you the courage and the strength to punch through whatever obstacles. Because if we focus on, again, control and influence, then we see possibilities, we see opportunities. We see open doors. If we focus on what we can't control, we tend to see closed doors. We don't see the opportunities and possibilities that might actually be sitting in front of us. Well, thanks for tuning in this week. Thanks for listening. I hope you found the information about the 3 rings helpful, and maybe it's a tool that you can use too. As usual, if you have any feedback or if you have any questions, you can reach me on Facebook. You can also reach me on LinkedIn, and you can also find me on a Twitter feed. But until next time we speak, keep well, and we'll speak soon.